It's an honor to introduce Dr. Shaikh Abdulla bin Ahmed Khalifa, who is the Undersecretary for International and Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain and Deputy Secretary General of the Supreme Defense Council. It's such an honor for us that you are here at the Gulf Futures Forum. I know you've taken time out of your busy schedule, so please, we'd be very interested to hear from you your vision of the future of the Abrahamic Accords and the nature of the current momentum. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Barak. Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, I would like to start by thanking the Strategic Intelligentia for their splendid organization of the Gulf Futures Forum and for providing me this opportunity to address you this morning. The relationship between the Kingdom of Bahrain and the State of Israel stands as a testament of how peace can bring about prosperity and stability on the bilateral level as well as the regional level. This has always been the vision of His Majesty, King Ahmed bin Isa Al Khalifa, starting with Bahrain hosting the Peace to Prosperity Workshop in 2019 to open a channel of dialogue on economic cooperation for the benefit of the people of the region, and later with the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020. Today, we look back at the milestones that we have achieved together with Israel since the establishment of the relation 17 months ago. We have established embassies and exchanged ambassadors. We have signed 38 agreements and MOUs covering a broad range of political, economic, and social sectors. And we have recently launched the first direct flight via Bahrain's national carrier Gulf Air on the 30th of September, 2021. And while these remarkable achievements were crucial in setting a solid foundation that links our governments, links our peoples, our aspirations remain high, and what is yet to come is even more astonishing. We are working closely with Israel on developing a 10-year joint war and peace strategy that will synchronize our goals by identifying key areas of interest that will bring our officials, our experts, and our peoples closer towards building a better future for both countries. These areas include innovation and technology, trade and investment, food and water security, healthcare, education, sustainable energy, environmental protections, religious and cultural coexistence. In February alone, the Kingdom of Bahrain hosted two major historic visits by high-level Israeli officials. The visit of His Excellency Benjamin Gantz, the Minister of Defense of Israel, on the 3rd of February, which marked the beginning of our bilateral military cooperation that resulted in the signing of an MOU in the field of defense. The visit was followed by the first historic visit of an Israeli Prime Minister to the Kingdom, His Excellency Naftali Bennett, on the 14th and the 15th of February. His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa and His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, met with Prime Minister Bennett and discussed avenues of mutual cooperation, particularly in the fields of trade, investment, and people-to-people ties. I also recently had the pleasure of speaking at the Munich Security Conference alongside His Excellency Dr. Anwar Gargash, the diplomatic advisor to the United Arab Emirates President, and His Excellency Benjamin Gantz, the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel, where we affirmed the importance of the Abraham Accords for the preservation of regional peace and security. And finally, sharing a joint vision and strategy will enable us to showcase the fruits of peace and serve as a regional model of how peace improves lives and inspires a much-needed hope for a region that has been suffering long enough. It will crush any existing doubts and skepticism, meant to keep the status quo to serve certain agendas and encourage those who are seeking change to follow in our footsteps. I thank you once again, Barak, for this opportunity, and I would welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate your sentiments that is expressed in your statements. I wanted to ask you, the United States refers to Bahrain as a major non-NATO ally, posting CENTCOM and the US Naval Fifth Fleet there. And how significant is it for you that in light of the regional flux that includes an emboldened Iran, an increased Russian and Chinese presence in the region, and non-committal nature of the US in the region, what is Bahrain's sentiment in light of all the we hear the cliche shifting sands, changing sands, and there's a reason that it is a cliche because the dynamics are changing the whole time so rapidly. What's your sentiment on that?
Well, Barak, I think this is a very important and timely question. And as we all know, CENTCOM mission is to direct and enable military operations and activities with allies and partners to increase regional security and stability in support of the United States and its allies in the region enduring interests. And this remains as valid and vital to Bahrain today as ever before. And in my opinion, the United States as a country has interests and priorities. And this does not mean a lack of commitment to the region. We understand the policies and strategy of the United States, and we have standing agreements and alliances for decades. The United States works with Bahrain with full transparency and commitment in securing the region against all kinds of threats. This alliance is not directed against any country or military influence, but rather against all potential threats to the region. Our alliance is guided by the interests of the United States and the interests of the countries of the region.
Thank you for that. And one final question before I open it up to everybody is, how does Bahrain's relationship with Israel via the Abrahamic Accords, how does it enable Bahrain to mitigate strategic risk in this environment of uncertainty? And is there a momentum to this? Who else do you see joining the Abrahamic Accords?
This has been a question on everybody's mind since the signing of the Abraham Accord. Who's next? And I believe the correct question is, how can we encourage others to join? I believe when His Majesty decided that the Kingdom of Bahrain will sign the Abraham Accords and establish bilateral diplomatic relations with Israel, it was for the mere peace and prosperity. And I believe the more successful we are, and the more we bear fruition from what has been already built in the past 17 months, the more others will be encouraged to join. And the only way to do that is to build a broad spectrum of collaboration on different fronts, which we have been doing with our different counterparts in Israel, and showing the people of both countries, how will this affect their lives? How will it bring about more security and stability? How will it bring about more economic development and prosperity? And believe in that building bridges of peace and prosperity is much better than having none.
And I remember a few years ago, I spoke at NATO's Parliamentary Assembly, and I met with a couple of Bahraini representatives that were also members of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. And I remember them actually expressing at the time, and I'm talking about at least 6-7 years ago, they were telling me privately, now is the time, now is the time really for peace with Israel. What do you think made that sense of change? What do you think contributed to that impetus?
I believe Bahrain is unique in the sense that being an island with a multi-diverse and multicultural, multi-religious and ethnic social fabric for centuries, with Muslims and Christians and Jews and Hindus and Baha'is who have been living peacefully side by side for centuries. Why not extend this to the wider region? And we believe that Bahrain presents itself as a successful model of peaceful coexistence. And we believe that only with peaceful coexistence with our neighbors, with all countries in the region, will we be able to move on towards the future for more security and prosperity. We cannot change history, but we can change the present and share the future. And this is exactly what we are doing.
It's just a remarkable change. And it's a really exciting time. Usually in the Middle East, it's constantly, if there's no bad news, it's just worse news. It's a region that's beset with trials and tribulations. But this is just such a glimmer of hope in the new Middle East. So it's an incredibly exciting time. May I ask you, are you comfortable me opening up the questions to everybody?
Of course, go ahead, I'm ready.
May anybody want to ask questions? It could be that your question, your statement and answers were so comprehensive that you preempted everybody's questions.
Well, I don't see any virtual hand being raised.
No.
Maybe someone raised his hand physically, but his camera is off.
Okay, I will read from Lisa Barrington. Thank you, Your Excellency. How do you see Bahrain and the Gulf stance on the Russia-Ukraine crisis developing?
Well, it's a sad development that we are following. Bahrain, as with the entire world, has been following the developments in Ukraine quite closely. And we have seen how the developments within the Security Council and later on within the General Assembly, how it has developed. Bahrain has always stood for the values and the principles enshrined within the United Nations Charter, the respect of the sovereignty of countries, the non-interference in other countries' affairs, the resolvement of disputes through peaceful means. And that is why Bahrain has supported the resolution that was put before the General Assembly. Bahrain has been coordinating quite closely with our allies throughout and even before the session within the General Assembly. And we believe that the aggression on Ukraine is an alarming development and escalation. And I believe it's incumbent upon all of us to do whatever is possible in our capacity to uphold the international rules-based system that has been preserving the globe for so long.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Lisa, for that question. Are there any other questions that anybody else would like to ask His Excellency?
I can see in the chat, how do you see Bahrain's and the Gulf stance? Oh, okay, so this was the question that you just posed.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think that the Russia crisis is going to escalate? The previous speaker was very optimistic and was saying that the Russian-Ukrainian, that ultimately the United States and Russia will be forced to be working with one another. What is your perspective on that? Do you think that's rosy optimism, or do you think that this is, that President Putin has overreached?
Well, we should always be optimistic regardless of the developments, because without being optimistic and without being focused, one would not be able to move forward and react in a positive manner. What we have been following and seeing how a number of world leaders being in constant contact with the president of Russia and the president of Ukraine and trying to mediate or facilitate certain agreements or discussions is something that is very much welcomed. And I believe having the involvement of world leaders in constant contact with both would certainly encourage in a positive manner the de-escalation that is happening in Ukraine.
Benjamin Bilski, he asks an important question. What's your view on the upcoming UK GCC free trade agreement negotiations?
Well, that I'm very optimistic on. There has been quite a close engagement with the United Kingdom following Brexit, and I think there is a very huge opportunity on that end. The teams of both the GCC and the United Kingdom has already been engaged on that front, and we believe this would be an important step moving ahead forward. The United Kingdom has been a historic ally and a partner to all of the Gulf countries. To us in Bahrain, perhaps it was the longest. 2016, the United Kingdom and Bahrain commemorated 200 years of relations. So we believe that this historic relation that has been built over the centuries would certainly encourage the arrangement of an FTA between the UK and the GCC. And from my understanding, negotiations are going well. And hopefully, and following a recent meeting between the GCC foreign ministers and the UK, in the UK, resulted in a number of positive developments on that front. So we remain optimistic on that, and hopefully it would be finalized in the short term, and we'll be able to celebrate it together.
Just on the back of what you just said, something which is really interesting is, just like there's this air of seeking peace in a new Middle East, I find that it's coupled with economic diversification that is taking place within every GCC state. And every GCC state has its kind of Vision 2030, and they're very focused on economic diversification. How do you see these free trade agreements fueling that?
I believe it's a very important segment of the economic diversification within the Gulf Cooperation Council member states. When it comes to the national economic visions, Bahrain was the first country to launch its economic vision back in 2008. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince launched the economic vision 2008. It was Bahrain's economic vision 2030, which focused on three main pillars: sustainability, equality, and competitiveness. And I believe looking at the historical reality that there has been 100% dependency on hydrocarbons, and this segment has contributed significantly to the GDP of all Gulf countries, moving towards economic diversification is the only way forward. And I believe even now, with the commitments that have been announced by all the Gulf states on the environmental protection, on the climate change, Bahrain just recently, during the recent COP at Glasgow, has announced that Bahrain would reach to a net zero carbon emission by 2060. Now that is a major development, moving towards renewable energy, moving towards energy efficiency, utilizing the underutilized solar and wind energy in our part of the world is a major transformation. But when we come and look into the solar energy and the storage of solar energy, it would require hydrogen, obviously, which is quite expensive. But at the same time, all of the Gulf states are developing these capacities to develop that with a number of global partners, including the UK. We have been engaging with the UK through a joint working group headed by the two foreign ministers. It engages on a constant basis, and part of the working groups that we have been working on has a particular attention to economic diversification. So we have been working quite closely with a number of UK authorities who have supported Bahrain in a number of initiatives and projects. And we believe that working closely with the United Kingdom as a reliable ally and a partner over the years is something that would continue and would develop.
Thank you for that. I want to just merge a number of questions together as our time is quite short. So Joseph Ninio is basically saying that there's an economic financial crisis looming, and the system has been destroyed by sanctions imposed on all trades. I would have personally have thought that the international system has come under a lot of strain because of COVID. And maybe I'll just adjust that question. Do you think that sanctions reinforce the COVID status of many economies? What's the position of Gulf states? How do you achieve economic rehabilitation internationally when we have these policy tools at our disposal? And from Eleanor Gillespie, how are Bahrain's relationships with Qatar these days? Are there any issues that need to be addressed in that relationship?
When it comes to COVID, the socio-economic impact that we have seen in the past 2 years was enormous. And we have seen it on every different front and level. Now, moving towards post-pandemic times, I believe finally life has come back to life, which is a good sign. But even with the current escalations and aggression against Ukraine, we have seen how it had its ripple effect across many different sectors when it comes to the energy markets, when it comes to the increase of wheat, basic needs all around the world. And I believe this will continue shouldn't there be any developments on a positive front. So moving away from COVID, which now I believe we just have to live with, like all the other viruses, H1N1 is still living amongst us and many others. And I think reviving the economies should be a priority, which is why the government in Bahrain now is focusing on. The question on Qatar, following the signing of Al-Ula Declaration on the 5th of January of last year, there has been developments with Saudi Arabia, with Egypt, with the UAE, as we have seen, and there were certain commitments within the Ula Declaration. First and foremost is to sit bilaterally and engage in resolving any pending issues between any two countries. Bahrain and Qatar has not met yet. We do look forward to the first meeting to be convened once the invitation that has been sent to Qatar is replied on. Bahrain has sent 3 invitations to Qatar, and we are still waiting for a reply from them. But Bahrain remains committed to the unity of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and we continue to work closely and engage on a multilateral front, but on a bilateral front, not much has been achieved.
May I just take the liberty of sort of that Yusuf Baku wrote a question about Bahrain being described by Foreign Policy magazine as paranoid about Iran and being self-defeating. Is this the reality? May I take the liberty of, first of all, responding to that? And may I just share my perspective? My perspective is that Bahrain is so forward-thinking, and it's thinking about connectivity, and it's thinking in a positive manner of how to expand the Abrahamic Accords, I find that other actors in the region are very much resistance orientated, and they don't necessarily have that networked approach that Bahrain has. And in light of, I would maybe even broaden the question and say, you know, history isn't necessarily linear, it's cyclical. To what extent do you think Bahrain's approach of expanding networks and cooperation, to what extent do you think that that will be sustainable in the future?
I think this is a very important question, which is again related to the question that Yusuf had asked. I actually heard about the article, and when I read just the title of the article, I smiled. I did not bother to read the article for a simple reason. We do live in Bahrain. Iran is an important neighbor. And for the past 4 decades, we have seen how the behavior of Iran towards Bahrain has been interfering in our domestic affairs, meddling with our security, supporting terrorism and extremism. And we have that by evidence, and we have publicly announced the numerous attempts by Iran to smuggle in arms and weapons into my country. This is not a secret, and we have always made this public. Unfortunately, this is a reality. We have no reason to continue to do this in a manner that would portray Iran as a state supporter of terrorism. This is the reality that we are facing, and we have suffered a lot over the years. Now, what we would want to see, we would want to see a stable Iran. We would want to see a prosperous Iran with economic development, with economic prosperity, because we know that anything that happens in Iran would have a ripple effect across the Gulf. And yet there has been so many attempts in the past to build those bridges of cooperation, of stability. Former President Mohammad Khatami, once upon a time, he was in Bahrain, he was received by His Majesty. Ahmadinejad, former president of Iran, he was also invited by His Majesty, and he came to Bahrain, and both convened talks on many different fronts. But what we have seen after that, the aftermath, has always been contradictory to what has been publicly said, whether by the president or the foreign minister. We all do realize the malign behavior of the IRGC, in particular in the region. They have continuously announced that publicly. Up until recently, Bahrain has, according to the Iranians, they have a seat for the 14th province in their parliament, which is quite an act of aggression against a neighboring country. But nevertheless, Bahrain is a small country. We know our size. All what we are trying to do is to protect the citizens, the residents, and the tourists who are visiting Bahrain in collaboration with our partners and our allies.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your comments. And it's not only because of you personally. I find Bahrain to be such an ambitious country in that it's small, and yet its impact is disproportionate to its size, especially spearheading the Abrahamic Accords, which isn't only sort of disproportionate size-wise, but it's also such a positive influence in the region. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and taking the time out. It's a huge honor, and thank you once again. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Barak, again, for giving me this opportunity. And I wish your forum all the best.
Thank you, and you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.